The room is quiet in the way it only gets when a tour day is supposed to be loud. A guitar leans against a wall that will not be on any poster. A pair of stage boots sits where they were dropped, not placed, as if the hands that usually control every detail suddenly ran out of patience. Somewhere down the hallway, a crew member laughs too hard at something that is not funny, the kind of laugh that tries to push away the heaviness for a few seconds. Tim McGraw is not on stage yet, but he is already performing, holding his face in that practice calm that people in the spotlight learn to wear even when the ground under them shifts. He has lived his whole adult life inside noise and applause, yet the moment that changes everything rarely arrives with music. It arrives with a phone buzzing at the wrong time, with a voice on the other end that sounds careful, with the pause before the words that no one wants to say out loud. In the world outside that room, the story moves faster than any human being can. A headline becomes a verdict. A rumor becomes a diagnosis. A private struggle becomes public property the second strangers decide they deserve an explanation. People call it concern, but concern can become a kind of pressure, and pressure can turn into cruelty without ever meaning to. When the name Faith Hill is involved, the temperature rises immediately. She is not only a singer. She is a symbol, a voice that carried a generation through breakups, weddings, long drives, and quiet kitchens at midnight. She's also one half of a marriage that many fans treat like proof that love can survive fame. So when the internet starts whispering that something is wrong, the whisper does not stay small. It becomes a wave. It reaches every corner of their legacy. It pushes toward the same question again and again, with the impatience of an audience that has forgotten what it means to wait. Tim and Faith have spent decades protecting a boundary that the public keeps trying to cross. They have shared stages, shared songs, shared a story that feels almost too perfect to be real, but they have never fully handed themselves over. Even the most devoted fans do not actually see the marriage, only the silhouette of it under bright lights. They see the hand held at an awards show, the glance exchanged during a duet, the smile that lands like reassurance. They do not see the arguments in hotel rooms, the hard conversations after a long day, the fatigue that settles into the bones when the schedule never stops. They do not see the moments when love is not romantic, when it is simply the decision to stay present when the other person cannot carry the weight alone. That is why the word saying goodbye hits so hard, because they sound final even when they might not be. A farewell can be many things. It can be a retirement. It can be a pause. It can be the quiet moment where someone chooses family over momentum. It can also be a story shaped by outsiders who want a dramatic ending more than they want the truth. The uncomfortable reality is that very few people know what is happening behind the curtain right now. Faith Hill has faced health discussions in the past, including widely reported neck surgery years ago, and that history makes every new photograph, every absence, every change in appearance feel like a clue to those searching for one. But a history is not the same thing as confirmation. Past medical events do not grant anyone permission to invent a present crisis. Silence does not automatically mean tragedy. Sometimes it means boundaries. Sometimes it means healing. Sometimes it means the family has decided that the most loving choice is not to explain. Still, the emotion in this moment is real, even if some of the claims around it are not. Fans feel shaken because this couple has been framed as steady for so long. They feel frightened because illness is the one storyline fame cannot negotiate with. And they feel protective because Faith does not just belong to Tim in their minds. She belongs to everyone who ever sang along to her songs and found their own life inside the lyrics. That kind of attachment is powerful, but it is also dangerous. It can turn a woman into a symbol and forget she is a person. It can turn a husband into a character in a drama and forget he is a man who may be trying to keep his household from collapsing under stress. If Tim McGraw is stepping back, it is not difficult to understand why. The industry rewards motion, not stillness. It rewards showing up, smiling, proving that you can keep going. But the strongest love stories are rarely built on performance. They're built on what happens when the lights go off and the real work begins. The real work is sitting in waiting rooms. The real work is swallowing fear so the other person can breathe. The real work is choosing to be present when there is nothing you can fix with talent or fame. In moments like this, goodbye does not have to mean the end of music. It can mean the end of pretending that the stage is more important than the life waiting at home. And that is the tension hanging over their story now. A public that wants answers. A private life that needs space. A couple whose love has always been the headline, suddenly facing a chapter where love might require the one sacrifice fans never want to hear about, stepping away. The question is not only what is happening to Faith Hill. The question is what happens to a legend when the world demands a statement and all you can offer is silence, loyalty, and the quiet decision to stay. When people try to understand a crisis, they reach backward. They rewind the tape of a life, looking for the first crack, the first warning sign, the moment where the story began to tilt. That is why so many videos like this start with a sweeping claim, everything has changed, and then rush into origin stories. Not because a birth certificate in a closet explains a marriage in its middle age, but because the human mind needs a map. It needs to believe that love and loss obey a pattern. If you can trace the line, you can pretend you have control over the ending. Tim McGraw's life, on paper, reads like a country song that wrote itself. He was born in Louisiana, raised by a mother who carried her own storms, and for years he lived under a name that wasn't truly his. When he was a boy, he believed the man who helped raise him was his biological father. Then, at 11, he found a birth certificate by accident and learned that his real father was Tug McGraw, famous, admired, and suddenly, a ghost-sized presence looming over his identity. But the revelation did not come with instant reconciliation. For years, Tug denied paternity. Imagine what that does to a child who has already been forced to grow up fast. It teaches you that even the truth can be rejected, that relationships can be conditional, and that love is not always offered freely just because you need it. Eventually, they did reconcile, and Tim and Tug built a relationship that lasted until Tug's death in 2004. But those years of distance leave a mark. They shape the kind of man Tim becomes. Fiercely loyal once he chooses you, protective of family, and perhaps more sensitive than his public persona suggests. People think of him as steady, masculine, grounded. Yet beneath that is someone who knows what it feels like to be unclaimed, and who would do almost anything to make sure the people he loves never feel that kind of abandonment. That psychological detail matters now, because it reframes the idea of putting his career on hold. For Tim, choosing family is not a marketing move. It is a vow he has already lived in the most personal way. Before music, Tim chased sports with real hunger. Baseball wasn't just a pastime. It was a possible future. He earned a scholarship and flirted with the idea of studying law. Then a knee injury closed the door on the dream of becoming a professional athlete. The cruel irony is that the injury that stole one identity gave him another. He learned guitar. He played wherever someone would let him. He got better the way people get better when they have no choice, through repetition, embarrassment, and stubborn hope. And when his idol Keith Whitley died in 1989, something in him snapped into urgency. He drove to Nashville and gambled everything on the idea that his voice could carry him. That gamble worked, but not instantly. Early records came and went with limited impact. He struggled, as so many artists do, in the space between wanting a destiny and not yet earning it. Then success arrived like a storm. Indian Outlaw stirred controversy. Don't Take the Girl broke through emotionally, and suddenly Tim McGraw wasn't just another guy with a guitar. He was a star. With fame came momentum, and with momentum came a new kind of danger, the temptation to build your life around the machine that rewards you. The industry loves a man who never stops. It applauds constant output. It treats rest like weakness. And yet, the hardest thing for many stars is learning when to step back before the machine consumes what matters most. Faith Hill's story runs parallel, not as an accessory, but as its own climb. She was adopted as an infant, raised in Mississippi, rooted in church music and propelled by a voice that refused to stay small. She arrived in Nashville young, broke, and determined. She worked jobs that had nothing to do with glamour. She auditioned. She got rejected. She kept going. There's a particular kind of strength required to stand in a room where your dream is being judged and to walk out with nothing, then come back again. By the time her first big break hit, she had already built the resilience that fame cannot manufacture. When Faith's debut album took off and the hits began stacking, Wild One, Piece of My Heart, she became more than a promising singer. She became a force. And then, in 1996, she joined Tim's tour. That is where the mythology starts. Two stars, both with recent heartbreak behind them, suddenly finding something undeniable in the chaos of the road. People call it fate because it sounds better than reality, but reality is more interesting. Reality is that the road strips you down. It shows you who someone is when they are tired, stressed, late, hungry, and still expected to smile. If love survives that environment, it is not fragile. They married quickly in a way that made the public gasp, then stayed married in a way that made the public stare. Over time, they built a family, welcomed 3 daughters, and turned their partnership into a kind of shared brand, without letting it become merely that. They toured together. They recorded duets that felt like private conversations performed in public. It's Your Love didn't just top charts. It became evidence to fans that what they had was real. But real marriages do not float above the laws of gravity. Tim has spoken about battling alcoholism in earlier years, and in those admissions you can hear the truth behind their public glow. There were moments when the house could have fractured. They didn't fracture. That does not make them perfect. It makes them committed. It suggests that the promise they made, "We won't walk away when things get hard," was not just a romantic line. It was a practice. Which brings the story back to the present tension. Concern about Faith's health, headlines that imply a tragic diagnosis, and the uncomfortable gap between public curiosity and private reality. What is known, and widely reported in past coverage, is that Faith underwent neck surgery years ago and that she has dealt with physical issues linked to an older injury. What is not known is the exact nature of any current situation, if there even is one that matches the dramatic framing. In the absence of confirmed details, there is only one ethical way to tell this story. Acknowledge the history without pretending it is proof, and respect that a family may choose silence as a form of protection, not deception. If Tim is choosing to slow down, the most honest interpretation may also be the simplest. Love sometimes looks like cancellation notices, like staying home, like trading applause for quiet. In a culture that demands constant performance, that choice can feel like a shock. But for a couple whose entire narrative has been built on not leaving when it gets hard, it is also the most consistent chapter they could possibly write. The problem with a love story that becomes public mythology is that, sooner or later, the mythology starts demanding a sacrifice. People do not just want the couple to exist. They want the couple to prove something on cue, prove that love is real, prove that family wins, prove that time cannot touch them. Tim McGraw and Faith Hill have spent most of their adult lives living under that kind of expectation. They built their careers in a genre that treats authenticity like currency, and they managed remarkably to keep their private world from being fully consumed by the public one. But now, as headlines swirl and fans search for explanations, the question is no longer about their talent or their legacy. It is about what happens when the strongest narrative they ever sold, "We face everything together," is tested in the one arena fame cannot control. If you step back and look at the architecture of their partnership, it is not built like a fairy tale. It is built like a contract between two people who understand cost. Faith Hill knew cost long before she knew stadium lights. She knew it in the jobs that paid rent but did not feed her soul, in the auditions where a single no could feel like a door slamming shut forever, in the long nights where she had to decide whether persistence was courage or delusion. Tim McGraw knew cost in a different language. Identity, rejection, the ache of not being claimed, the bruise of discovering the truth and then watching it be denied. These are not decorative hardships. They are formative pressures. They shape how people love. They shape what people fear. When they met on tour in 1996, the public saw romance. What they likely experienced underneath the romance was recognition. Two people who have fought for their place in the world can sometimes sense, almost immediately, whether the person standing in front of them is capable of staying when the shine wears off. That is what the road reveals. Touring is glamorous only from a distance. Up close, it is fatigue, logistics, and constant transition. It is learning to be kind when you're exhausted. It is learning to be patient when nothing goes according to plan. If a relationship catches fire there, it is not because life is easy. It is because the connection has already survived friction. Their marriage, fast, surprising, and public, became an instant story. The lipstick yes on the mirror is the kind of detail that people repeat because it feels like proof. But the real proof came later, in the years that did not make headlines. It came in the choices they made when attention shifted away, in the way they protected their daughters from the machinery of celebrity, and in the way they kept returning to the same principle. Family first, even when the industry offers 1,000 reasons to do the opposite. That principle matters now because the current moment, whatever its precise facts, has been framed by outsiders as dramatic and final. Saying goodbye, tragic diagnosis. Language like that is designed to create urgency. It tells viewers, something is ending, and you must look now before it's too late. But when you examine the transcript closely, it also contains a quiet correction, an acknowledgement that speculation about someone's health can be harmful, invasive, and irresponsible. That is not a throwaway moral note. It is a warning. It is the line that separates storytelling from exploitation. In a situation like this, the most responsible approach is to hold two truths at once. The first truth is that Faith Hill has had publicly reported health-related issues in the past, including discussions around neck surgery years ago. That history is not a secret, and it explains why fans become alert when she appears less frequently or when her appearance shifts. The second truth is that history is not confirmation of a current crisis, and silence is not evidence. People can step back from public life for reasons that have nothing to do with tragedy, family priorities, creative fatigue, personal boundaries, or simply the right to live without explaining every season of your life to strangers. And yet, the emotional logic of the moment remains powerful. If Tim McGraw is indeed pausing or slowing down, that choice resonates because it fits the pattern of the man we have been shown over time. Tim has spoken openly about how marriage and family steadied him when addiction threatened to destabilize everything. In that framework, stepping back from work is not loss. It is alignment. It is choosing the one thing that does not applaud you, but needs you. For a performer, that choice can feel like walking into silence after decades of noise. For a husband, it can feel like coming home. There's also another layer here that people rarely say out loud. When a couple has spent years being celebrated as a symbol, privacy becomes a form of survival. The public's love can be genuine and still suffocating. Even well-intentioned concern can become a demand. Tell us what's happening. Prove she's okay. Explain the scar. Confirm the rumors. But illness, if it is present, does not unfold neatly on social media timelines. Healing is not content. Pain is not a press release. Sometimes the most humane thing a family can do is refuse to turn a vulnerable chapter into a spectacle. This is where comparisons often emerge. Stories like Chadwick Boseman's, mentioned in the transcript, where a public figure chose to fight quietly and the world only learned the truth after. The point of such a comparison should never be to imply the same outcome. The point is to highlight how quickly the public can misread physical changes, how harsh the commentary can become, and how much pressure a person carries when the world thinks it owns their image. In that sense, the transcript is doing something important. It is reminding viewers that speculation is not harmless entertainment. It can shape real suffering. From a storytelling standpoint, this creates a tension that is almost unbearable because it is unresolved. Fans want a clear statement. Media outlets want a definitive angle. But real life often offers neither. Real life offers uncertainty, and uncertainty is exactly what celebrity culture struggles to tolerate. That discomfort is why dramatic phrasing spreads so quickly. Tragic diagnosis is a shortcut that turns complexity into a single sharp hook. It gives people a feeling of certainty, even when certainty is not available. If you strip away the noise and return to the core of what has made Tim and Faith endure, it is not perfection. It is practice. It is the repeated act of choosing each other in ordinary moments, raising children, navigating career decisions, managing mistakes, rebuilding trust where afraid. That kind of love is not cinematic. It is disciplined. And disciplined love tends to show itself most clearly when the spotlight dims. So what does goodbye truly mean here? It may not mean the end of a career or an ending of a life on stage forever. It may mean a goodbye to an era of constant motion, a goodbye to the idea that they must keep feeding the public an image of unshakable strength. It may mean the beginning of a quieter season where the priority is not production, but presence. And in a way, that would be the most honest chapter they could write. Because if the promise has always been we don't walk away when it gets hard, then the real climax of this story is not a headline. It is a decision made privately, away from cameras, where Tim McGraw chooses to be a husband first and a superstar second. The public may never get every detail at once, but perhaps that is the lesson embedded in their longevity. The strongest love stories are not the ones explained to everyone. They are the ones protected enough to survive. By the time a couple reaches the stage Tim McGraw and Faith Hill have reached, decades in the public eye, awards, stadium tours, an image polished by time, people stop seeing them as two individuals and start seeing them as a single idea. They become the golden couple, a symbol that fans can hold up against their own disappointments. If love can survive fame for them, then maybe love can survive everything. That is why any disruption feels personal to the audience. It is not just concern for Faith's health or curiosity about Tim's choices. It is the fear that the symbol might crack, and with it, the comforting story people have been borrowing for years. But symbols are not meant to carry real pain. Real pain is messy. It interrupts schedules. It forces hard conversations. It turns glamorous routines into complicated logistics. And the more public the couple is, the more complicated that pain becomes because the outside world insists on narrating it. A headline is written before a doctor finishes a sentence. A rumor fills the space between a photograph and an explanation. The result is a strange double life, a private struggle unfolding in real time, while a public story races ahead as if it already knows the ending. This is where the transcript takes a turn that matters. After flirting with dramatic framing, it pauses to acknowledge something most celebrity commentary ignores. Speculation about health can be harmful. That line is not merely ethical decoration. It is a recognition of the power imbalance between the famous and the anonymous. A stranger can type, "She looks sick," and walk away. The person being discussed has to live with the echo of it. Their family has to carry that echo into their quietest rooms. In some cases, the commentary becomes part of the burden, making recovery harder, not easier. Faith Hill has long been an easy target for this kind of scrutiny because her career has included visible pauses and shifts. In the 1990s, her momentum was interrupted by health issues that forced delays. In later years, public attention latched onto physical markers, like the scar that became visible in 2015, turning a personal medical matter into a public guessing game. Even when reports about a past procedure are accurate, they often get repackaged by entertainment media as an ongoing mystery, as if a single surgery is a permanent cliffhanger. This is how the internet turns a person into an open case file. Every absence becomes a clue, every change becomes evidence, and every silence becomes suspicious. Against that backdrop, Tim McGraw's alleged choice to pause everything is not just romantic. It is strategic in the most human sense. It is the decision to control what can still be controlled: time, presence, protection. In a marriage, especially one shaped by public life, there is a constant negotiation between exposure and safety. The stage gives you money, legacy, and applause. It also takes privacy, stability, and often the illusion of normality. When health enters the picture, whether through a major diagnosis or a complex long-term issue, privacy stops being a preference and becomes a necessity. It is important to say this clearly. The public does not know the full medical reality of Faith Hill's current situation, and that absence of certainty is precisely what makes this moment so dangerous for irresponsible storytelling. Tragic diagnosis is the kind of phrase that can drive clicks, but can also do damage by planting fear in fans, by putting pressure on a family, and by turning any future statement into a spectacle. The healthiest way to speak about it is to treat it as a boundary. Acknowledge what has been publicly reported in the past, refuse to invent new facts, and focus on what is emotionally true without pretending to know what is medically true. Emotionally, what is true is this. Long marriages do not last because two people never face adversity. They last because, when adversity arrives, they have a shared language for survival. Tim and Faith have built that language over years. They have navigated fame's distortions. They have raised children under bright lights. They have worked through addiction, distance, and the pressure of being watched. They have also demonstrated a pattern of returning to the same priorities whenever the noise gets too loud: family, faith, and respect. One of the most revealing details in the transcript is the description of their promise: not to walk away when things get hard. It sounds simple, almost cliché, but it is not. In practice, it means absorbing the reality that hard times change the rules. They change the distribution of energy in a household. They shift roles. They turn one partner into the anchor while the other is exhausted, frightened, or physically limited. That kind of love is not a feeling. It is work, repeated daily, often without applause. And if Tim McGraw is stepping back, it may be because he recognizes something the public often forgets. The machine of fame does not pause for your pain. Tours keep moving. Contracts keep demanding. Fans keep asking. The industry will always reward the artist who continues, even if continuing costs them privately. So choosing to stop, choosing to stay home, to be present, to protect, becomes a radical act in a culture that confuses productivity with worth. There is also a quieter truth about couples who have spent their lives in performance. Sometimes the most meaningful expression of love is refusing to perform, refusing to convert a private ordeal into a public narrative, refusing to give the world what it wants when what the family needs is silence. That silence can look cold from the outside, but inside, it can be merciful. It could be the space where healing happens without commentary, where fear can be spoken without microphones, where the person who is struggling does not also have to manage the emotions of millions of strangers. So perhaps the Real story is not a dramatic goodbye. Perhaps it is a shift in priorities that has always been present beneath their public image. A reminder that the strongest couples are not the ones who look perfect. They're the ones who know when to step away from the stage and choose each other when it counts most. When a relationship has been watched for so long, people begin to mistake visibility for access. They have seen Tim McGraw and Faith Hill share microphones, share a stage, share a smile that seems to reassure an entire arena. They have heard them sing about devotion as if it were a natural resource that never runs out. Over time, fans develop a kind of emotional entitlement, not because they are malicious, but because the relationship has been part of their lives in 1,000 small ways. Their songs played during weddings, breakups, long drives, and sleepless nights. The couple became woven into personal memories. So when uncertainty appears, the reaction is immediate. The public leans forward and asks, "Tell us what's happening." In the modern media ecosystem, that request does not stay polite. It becomes a demand. This is why the word diagnosis is so powerful. It sounds clinical, definitive, undeniable. It implies authority. But in celebrity culture, it is often used as narrative shorthand, an attempt to push a private situation into a dramatic structure people recognize. A diagnosis becomes the plot twist that justifies a goodbye. The risk is that viewers start consuming real human vulnerability as entertainment. Even if a health issue exists, the details are not ours to own. Faith Hill is not a character. She is a person who has the same rights as anyone else, to heal quietly, to share only what she chooses, and to be protected from speculation that can spiral into panic. And yet, it would also be dishonest to pretend there is no reason fans are worried. Concern does not come from nowhere. Over the years, Faith's career has included pauses, public appearances that spark questions, and acknowledged medical history that people keep revisiting. When you combine that with the way celebrity headlines are written, always sharper, always more urgent than reality, those pieces get arranged into a frightening story, even when the most important piece is missing: confirmation. In that vacuum, the internet fills in the blanks. That is not journalism. It is projection. At this stage, what can be said responsibly is limited but meaningful. Faith Hill has faced physical issues in the past that were widely discussed in media coverage, and it is not unusual for someone with a history of musculoskeletal or spinal problems to experience recurring challenges over time. But not unusual is not a diagnosis, and history is not evidence of a current crisis. If there is an ongoing situation, only Faith and her medical team know its nature and severity. If the family chooses not to disclose it, that choice should be interpreted as a boundary, not as an invitation to speculate. So why does Tim's potential decision to pause resonate so deeply? Because it is the opposite of what fame typically rewards. The entertainment industry trains stars to treat personal difficulty as either an obstacle to overcome publicly or a story to monetize. There is always another tour date, another contract, another audience waiting. The most successful performers often become experts at compartmentalizing pain, smiling on stage while their private world trembles. Choosing to slow down, especially at a time when momentum is still profitable, suggests a value system that cannot be purchased. It says, some things are more important than applause. Tim McGraw's past, as laid out in narratives like The Transcript, helps explain why this choice makes emotional sense. He grew up with complicated ideas about family and belonging, and he eventually built a relationship with his father after years of denial and distance. That experience can sharpen a person's loyalty. It can make them allergic to abandonment. Later, as Tim has admitted, addiction once threatened to destabilize his life. In that chapter, Faith's steadiness mattered. If you believe your spouse helped save you, you do not treat their struggle as an inconvenience. You show up. You repay presence with presence. This is also where the golden couple label becomes misleading. It suggests ease, perfection, and constant harmony. In reality, the strength of a long marriage is often forged in unglamorous negotiations, who sacrifices when schedules collide, who absorbs stress when the other can't, who chooses forgiveness when pride would rather win. Tim and Faith have been honest enough over the years to hint that their marriage required real work. The idea that they would face a hard season by closing ranks, rather than performing normalcy for outsiders, is not shocking. It is consistent. There is another dimension that often gets overlooked: their children. By the time their daughters grew up and left home, Tim and Faith entered a new phase of life, one where the marriage becomes central again, without the daily structure of parenting. Many couples find that transition difficult even without fame. When health concerns enter the picture, the sense of responsibility intensifies. The instinct to protect family becomes not just emotional, but logistical. Medical appointments, rest, scheduling, privacy. The practical reality of caregiving can reshape every day. In that context, pausing a career is not a dramatic gesture. It is a rational response. But the most important part of this story is not the choice itself. It is the way the public responds to it. If the audience treats goodbye as a spectacle, the couple loses the one thing they might need most: space. If fans truly want to honor Faith Hill and Tim McGraw, the most respectful posture is patience. It is accepting uncertainty without forcing a narrative. It is allowing them to decide on their own timeline what they will share, if they share anything at all. In the end, the healthiest conclusion is not a cliffhanger. It is a principle. Love is not measured by how much a couple posts or how many interviews they give. Love is measured by what happens when no one is watching. If Tim McGraw is stepping back, it is not because the story needs drama. It is because the marriage needs presence. And that may be the most authentic country chapter of all. Choosing the person over the performance, and choosing silence over spectacle when it matters most. There is a moment in every public story where the audience reaches the edge of what it can legitimately know. Beyond that edge is private territory. Medical appointments, late-night conversations, fear that is spoken in whispers, and decisions made not for optics, but for survival. The problem is that celebrity culture rarely respects edges. It treats the unknown like an invitation. It treats silence like a puzzle. It turns waiting into suspicion. And when the people involved are Tim McGraw and Faith Hill, the pressure intensifies because their partnership has been marketed, celebrated, and emotionally adopted by millions. This is why responsible storytelling has to change its posture in part 6 of a narrative like this. Up to this point, it is easy to speak about history. Their early lives, their rise, their love story, their public achievements, and the challenges they have openly acknowledged. History is documented. History has receipts. But the present moment, especially when it touches health, requires restraint. The honest sentence is also the most frustrating one. We do not know everything, and we are not entitled to know everything. If Faith Hill is dealing with a health issue, the most important thing to understand is that healing is not a performance. Recovery is often nonlinear. It includes good days and bad days, setbacks and small victories, physical discomfort and emotional exhaustion. Public attention can complicate that process. It can make a person feel watched at their most vulnerable. It can make them feel as if they are failing the public simply by being human. For an artist whose career has been built on presence, on the ability to step onto a stage and give people certainty through sound, being unable or unwilling to show up in the same way can be psychologically difficult. Privacy becomes not just protection, but medicine. This is where the transcript's caution about speculation becomes more than a moral note. It is practical wisdom. Speculation invites the worst behavior of the internet. Amateur diagnosis, body commentary, conspiracies, and the kind of cruel certainty that makes strangers feel powerful. It also creates a pressure loop. If fans believe something terrible is happening, they demand statements. If the family stays quiet, the demands escalate. If the family responds, the response is picked apart for clues. In that environment, even a simple update can become a trap. The healthiest way to think about Tim McGraw's role, if he is indeed stepping back, is not as a dramatic farewell, but as a shift into the kind of love that rarely trends. Long-term partnership, especially under stress, is built from invisible actions. Driving to appointments, managing schedules, keeping life stable, shielding a spouse from unnecessary stress, and making sure the household remains functional when energy is limited. This is the unromantic truth. When health becomes a concern, love becomes logistical. It becomes planning. It becomes patience. It becomes the willingness to carry the weight without resenting it. Tim has already spoken in broad terms about what faith and family have meant to him. In narratives about his life, you often see the same pattern. He does not frame his marriage as effortless. He frames it as anchoring. That matters because anchors are not only useful in calm water. They are built for storms. If his career pauses, it is not because he has lost love for music. It is because he understands priorities the way people do when they have faced collapse before. The stage can wait. The person you love cannot. There is also a deeper theme that runs through Tim and Faith's public story: control versus surrender. Their careers required extreme control of voice, image, schedule, brand, and performance. But certain parts of life refuse control. Injury, illness, aging. The body changes. The energy changes. The timeline changes. In those moments, the most mature response is surrender, accepting what is real and adjusting accordingly. For high-achieving artists, surrender can feel like defeat. But in healthy relationships, surrender is often how you survive. You stop fighting reality and start building around it. For fans, this part of the story can be difficult because it offers no clean conclusion. People want certainty. Is she okay? Is it serious? Will she come back? But real life does not always provide satisfying endings on demand. Sometimes it provides seasons. A season of rest. A season of quiet. A season where the greatest victory is simply stability. If Faith Hill's career has proven anything, it is that stepping back does not necessarily mean stepping away forever. She has paused before, after intense touring, after major projects, then returned with renewed focus. That pattern suggests resilience, not disappearance. At the same time, it is also fair to acknowledge that people change. Priorities evolve. What mattered at 30 can feel different at 50 or 60. A couple becomes empty nesters, and suddenly the house is quieter. The marriage has more space in it. In that context, choosing more privacy, more home life, and fewer public demands could be a positive decision, not a loss. The public may interpret it as tragedy because it looks like an ending. But for the couple, it may be an intentional beginning, a recalibration toward what they want their life to be. So the most responsible conclusion for this segment is not an assumption, but an appeal to perspective. If you admire Tim McGraw and Faith Hill, admire them in a way that honors their humanity. Let them have a private chapter without forcing it into a public script. Let silence be silence, not scandal. Let love be quiet when it needs to be quiet. And if there is a goodbye happening, consider that it may be a goodbye to a certain pace, a certain era of constant exposure. Not a goodbye to music, not a goodbye to hope, and certainly not a goodbye to each other. If you have followed Tim McGraw and Faith Hill for years, the temptation right now is to treat this moment like a final chapter, to look at the silence, the headlines, the worry in fan communities, and assume the story must be moving toward a dramatic conclusion. But the truth is that most real love stories do not end with a clean curtain drop. They continue in quieter forms. They change shape. They move away from stages and into kitchens, doctors' offices, living rooms, and ordinary mornings that never trend online. And in many ways, that kind of continuation is more powerful than any public finale because it is not performed. It is lived. What has made Tim and Faith's partnership so compelling is not simply that they are talented. It is that they have consistently acted like a team. They met in the intensity of touring life, married quickly, and then did something far harder than falling in love. They stayed. They stayed through the chaos of fame, through exhausting schedules, through the pressure of being watched, and through personal struggles they have never fully dramatized for public consumption. They raised 3 daughters in an environment that could easily have swallowed family life, and they worked to protect the parts of their world that mattered most. That is not luck. That is intention. So if there is a shift happening now, if Tim is pulling back, if Faith is more private, if their public rhythm is changing, then the best way to interpret it is through the pattern they have already shown. Their story has never been about chasing attention at any cost. It has been about choosing what lasts. In the early years, that choice meant pushing through hard seasons, supporting each other, and building stability when the world expected constant output. Today, that choice may mean something different. Less performance, more presence, fewer appearances, more protection, less explanation, more peace. The public will always want certainty, especially around health. People fear the unknown, and when they love someone's work, they feel personally invested in the person behind it. But one of the most mature forms of support is accepting that you may never get the full picture. Faith Hill does not owe strangers a medical file. Tim McGraw does not owe strangers a detailed schedule of what is happening in his home. They have given audiences decades of music, memories, and moments. They are allowed to keep something for themselves. This is where the idea of goodbye needs to be reframed. If there is a goodbye, it may not be a goodbye to fans or to music or to the life they built. It may be a goodbye to the illusion that they must always be available. A goodbye to the pressure of being a symbol. A goodbye to the expectation that a marriage must be constantly displayed in order to be believed. In a world that treats privacy like suspicious behavior, choosing privacy can be an act of courage. There's also a broader truth hidden inside this story, one that applies far beyond celebrity. When health becomes a concern, it forces a reordering of values. It reminds people that careers are not the same as life. It exposes how fragile plans can be. And it reveals what love actually looks like when it is not romantic language, but practical action. Love looks like patience when there is fear. It looks like steadiness when the other person is exhausted. It looks like showing up again and again, even when the outcome is uncertain. If Tim is choosing to step back, that decision reflects a hierarchy of importance that many people claim to have but struggle to live. The person you love comes first. For fans, the most meaningful response is not to amplify rumors. It is not to demand confirmation. It is not to reward sensational headlines with attention. The most meaningful response is to let the couple breathe, to respect the boundary between admiration and intrusion, to hold space for the possibility that what is happening is serious without pretending you know the details, and to hold equal space for the possibility that what is happening is simply a private recalibration. In either case, the humane posture is the same: patience, respect, and restraint. And if Faith Hill returns to the spotlight in the future, the return will be hers to define. Her career has already shown that stepping back can be part of her rhythm, not a sign of defeat. She has paused before, refocused, and reemerged with strength. That pattern is resilience. But even if her public presence becomes smaller, that does not erase what she has already built. Music does not vanish when the artist steps away. It stays in people's lives. It stays in the songs that play during important moments long after the headlines have moved on. So the final note of this story should not be panic. It should be perspective. Tim McGraw and Faith Hill have spent years showing what commitment looks like in a world that rewards distraction. If they're facing a difficult season, then the truest way to honor them is to respect the very values they have lived by: loyalty, family, faith, and privacy when it is needed. The question we are left with is not, what exactly is the diagnosis? The question is simpler, and perhaps more challenging. In a culture that treats everything as content, can we learn to love people we admire without demanding access to their pain?